Hello and welcome. Here we go with Year 7 Biology Part 1. It's all about classification. So if you want to take a snapshot, do it now. Otherwise, I'm zooming in. And here we go. I'll go right in here. Look at this. All right. First of all, we're going to discuss why do we classify? Well, Carl Linnaeus, back when he was alive a long time ago, was having problems with communicating to other scientists about organisms. And he was finding that people were using common names and they weren't actually talking about the same thing anyway. So the first thing is it allows scientists to communicate effectively and to not use common names. It also allows scientists to talk about the same organism when they want to talk about the same organism. It also allows us normal people to group similar organisms together and also to know which ones we can eat and which ones we can't. So, on that theme, if we look at this lovely picture here, I guess when people started looking at magpies, they thought they were all the same thing, but now we know that there are 7 different species of magpies and they aren't the same. All right, then we come back to hear about the classification hierarchy. It was first postulated by Carl Linnaeus, and he postulated that there was 2 main groups of things being Vegetabalia, which were plants, and Animalia, which were animals, but he developed this thing called the binomial nomenclature, which is a 2-name naming system. And modern scientists have expanded upon this concept, and now we have what we call the classification hierarchy. So it starts with the domain, which is the largest group, and they all have the least in common. Then comes kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. And the species is the smallest group with the most in common. You need to know this classification hierarchy. Now, if we look for an example of that, let's look at dogs. So the domain for dogs is eukaryotes, which is all cells have a nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. And as you can see, a lot of things have a nucleus and membrane-bound organelles all the way down to like a paramecium. All right, the next is the kingdom, which is all animals or animalia. And then comes for a dog, comes chordata, and chordates have a backbone, not necessarily made of bone, but certainly a backbone that wraps around the spine. Then comes the class Mammalia, which is mammals, which they feed their young milk and they have a 4-chambered heart and they're covered in fur, etc. Then we have order Carnivora, which means that they feed off flesh or meat. They are carnivores. Then we have the family Canidae, which is dog-like animals. Next is the genus Canis, which is all dogs, including wild dogs and the dogs we have at home. And finally, we have species, which in this case is Canis lupus, but Canis lupus is not the domestic dog. Canis lupus is a wolf. The domestic dog is Canis familiaris. Okay, so we zoom out a little bit here, and then we go down to being what is a species. Now, a species is a group of similar individuals. They don't have to be identical. They just have to look similar, and they cannot breed with another species. Now, the fancy word for not being able to breed with another species is called reproductive isolation, which means it can only breed with its own species. And when it does, it makes fertile and viable offspring. Fertile means it can reproduce, and viable means it lives long enough to be able to reproduce. In short, the offspring can make more offspring. Okay, and then I've got down here a very famous diagram from Charles Darwin, which shows us 4 different species of finch, and he based his species on the beak shape on what food they are able to eat. Then we get to the problem of how do we classify? And we classify things based upon strong characteristics, which are things that do not change. And as scientists, we use dichotomous keys that can either be diagrammatic or tabular, which we'll get to in just a minute, but both of them work on the assumption that there is one question with 2 answers. So as we get down to here, here is a tabular form. As you can see, 1A and 1B. 1A, the rock is black. If it is, go to step 2, etc., and work your way through. On the other one is called diagrammatic, which is more of a branching tree diagram. Okay, so now we come up the top here. And first of all, we're going to talk about the types of symmetry. First of all, you can have no symmetry, which is asymmetrical, which is the sea sponges, there is no specific order to the organization of cells. Then we have radial symmetry, which is as long as you cut through the middle, each wedge, including a middle bit, will be identical. And the best example of radial symmetry are the cnidarians and the echinoderms, like sea urchins. And then last of all, we have bilateral symmetry, which is if you cut it down the middle, then both sides will be identical. Okay, so if we start looking into the classification of the invertebrates, these are the phylum, or phyla is plural for phylum, of invertebrates, and vertebrates have no backbone. So first of all, we have the arthropods, and the word arthropod actually means jointed leg. It has bilateral symmetry, which means if you cut it down the middle, both sides will be identical, and it has an exoskeleton, and the exoskeleton is made of chitin, and the way you write that would be chitin. You might think it's pronounced chitin, but it's actually chitin. All right, then we have mollusks, which have a large muscular foot, bilateral symmetry, and well-developed organs. Here we have a squid. Okay, porifera or poriferans are aquatic and asymmetrical. Remember, this is the one that has no symmetry. And here is porifera, it's a sea sponge. Okay, then we've got echinoderms, and the word echinoderm actually means spiny or spiky skin. It has radial symmetry, and it has one opening for feeding, so its mouth is its bum. All right, then we have cnidarians. Now it's got a silent C at the front, and cnidarians have stinging cells called nematocysts. They have radial symmetry, and there's two forms. There's the polyp, which is coral, and the medusa form, which is a jellyfish. Then we've got three types of worms. The first type of worm is platyhelminthes. It has bilateral symmetry, and it's an unsegmented flatworm. Then we've got nematodes, once again bilateral symmetry, and it's an unsegmented roundworm. And then last of all, we've got annelids, which are bilateral symmetrical, and they're segmented roundworms like this earthworm here. All right, then we get to the classification of chordates, and a chordate is anything with a backbone. And the backbone can be cartilage or it can be actual bone. First of all, we've got agnatha, which is a jawless fish. It is ectothermic, which means that its body temperature is the same as the environment, and it has a cartilaginous skeleton. Next of all, we've got chondrichthyes. They have fins and gills. They're ectothermic mostly. I say mostly because the great white shark shows some degree of being an endotherm, and these are the sharks and rays. Next of all, we've got ostichithes, which have, again, fins and gills. They're ectothermic, but these are the normal bony fish that we think of, right? So here I've got here normal fish. It's actually a bony fish, but we consider them the normal fish, if you get what I mean. Amphibians are next, and they breathe through their skin and through lungs. They are ectothermic, which means their body temperature mimics that of the environment, and they lay eggs in water. Next of all, we've got reptiles. They have a hard, scaly skin. Again, they're ectothermic, and they lay soft, leathery eggs. Next is aves, which is birds. They have feathers and wings. The feathers are used for insulation, and the wings aren't always for flying, like in penguins. They are endothermic, which means they generate an internal heat so that they can stay warm even in cold conditions, and they lay hard-shelled eggs. Then we have mammals. Mammals have a four-chambered heart. They are covered in fur or hair. They have mammary glands to feed their young, and they feed their young milk, and they are endothermic. You'll notice that you can stay warm on a cold day. Right, then we have the classification of mammals. There are three types of mammals. There are the monotremes that lay soft, leathery eggs, and interestingly, they have no nipples. They exude their milk through their skin, and their babies, the puggles, lick the milk off the skin. Next, we've got placentals, which the young develop in a placenta to be born alive. You, I take it, are a placental. And then we have marsupials, which give birth to undeveloped young, which stay in a pouch until they are ready to come out, and which is normally a couple of years. Then we get down to And then we get down to the classification of plants. All right, there are lots of divisions. So the first major division is between vascular and non-vascular. Non-vascular plants do not have veins in their leaves. In fact, they've got no true roots, stems, or leaves, and this is a moss. They can only live in moist environments. Then we've got vascular, which means they do have veins in their leaves. And we've got the two major divisions here, which are seedless plants. They use spores, and the example here is ferns. And then the other subtype is seeded. Now, in seeded vascular plants, we've got both gymnosperms and angiosperms. Gymnosperms use cones with seeds, and angiosperms have flowers with seeds. And if we look at this diagram here, here is a gymnosperm, the classic pine cone. The word gymnosperm actually means naked seed. So these seeds are just found in between the scales, I guess, of the cone when it opens. Here we've got an angiosperm and we see that the seeds are inside a fruit. So with angiosperms, again, there is two divisions. There is monocotyledons and dicotyledons. The word monocotyledon means one seed leaf. So when the seed germinates, one leaf comes out initially. Its flower parts are in threes, and it also has parallel veins. Dicotyledons, on the other hand, the word dicotyledon means two seed leaves. So when it germinates, two leaves come out. Its flower parts are in fours and fives, and it has network veins in its leaves. And we look here, we've got a comparison between monocots and dicots. In the seed, there is one seed leaf in monocots and two in a dicot. The roots of a monocot are fibrous, but the roots in a dicot are a taproot with little roots coming off the side. The monocot has parallel veins in its leaves, and the dicot has network veins in its leaves. And monocots have flower parts in threes, and the dicot has flower parts in fours and fives. Okay, I hope you found that enjoyable and informative, and we'll see you again for part 2. Goodbye.